Good morning, everyone, and thank you again for joining us here. Some were able to join us down at the cemetery, and we thank you for that as well, for making a minion and for being the gentle hands that carried Marilynn to her final rest. It was a brief but beautiful service down there, and with acknowledgement of the rain and how long Marilynn has known all of you, we wanted to be here in her place, a synagogue that she is an intrinsic and always will be a part of, to, in the warmth of this space, not only the warmth of our heating system, but also the warmth of all of you, to have an opportunity to properly share stories and memories, and to say Kaddish again with this family. So Cantor Gutman is going to begin with a traditional psalm, Shaviti, as we thank God for the blessing of this woman, for having known her in our life, and though there is tremendous sadness at having lost her now, we know that just as God is always with us throughout all that we do, when we are asleep and when we are awake, so too through the words of this psalm is your mother's memory and her life's teachings. They endure and they are internal. They far outlive her physical body because they are very much a part of our spirit and the spirit of this congregation. Cantor.
Shiviti Adonai L'negdi tamid, ki mimini bol emut. Lachen somach libi, vayagel kevodi, ach besari, ishkon lavetach. Ki lo ta'azov nafshi lishol, lo titein chasidcha lirot shachat. Todieni orach haim, svas machot et ponecha, nehimot b'minacha netzach.
Rabbi Bregman and Cantor Gutman are going to lead us in Psalm 23. It's on the inside of your handout.
Mizmor David.
This Psalm of David.
Adonai rahi lo echsar.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
Bino deshe yar betzeni.
Makes me to lie down in green pastures.
Al me menuchot yenahaleni.
He leads me beside the still waters.
Nafshi yeshoveh.
He restores my soul.
Yanacheni b'magle tzedek lemahan shemo.
He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake.
Gam ki elech begetz al mavet lo irara ki ata imadi.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me.
Shiftecha umishantecha hemo yenachamuni.
Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
Taroch lefonai shulchan neged sorerai.
Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies.
Dishantav Hashem en roshi kosiravaya.
Thou hast anointed my head with oil, and my cup runneth over.
Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yamechayai.
Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life.
V'shavti b'veit Adonai liorech yamin.
And I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
It is Jewish tradition to turn to the Psalms, to the writings of King David. What we now understand were his journal entries, his diary, his reflections on life and all of its ups and downs and challenges. And that we can find in David's own words that came from thousands of years ago, words that still speak to us today, because the human experience and circumstance is not all that different. Sure, technology has changed things, but life and its challenges, as Marilynn knew quite so well, is really not all that different from the generations before us. And just as her own mother faced challenges of raising her children without the support of a partner for much of it, so too did Marilynn as a single mother, and the challenges of raising her children in a new community, and all of those things. And David speaks of that as well, though in biblical prose. I wanted to share one of his psalms with us. It's not in your handout. The psalmist writes, Adonai, you have been our refuge in every generation. Before the mountains came into being, before you brought forth the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity you are God. You return us to dust and decree that we are mortal. For in your sight 1,000 years are as yesterday, when it has passed as a watch in the night. You engulf us in sleep. We are like grass that renews itself. At daybreak it flourishes anew, and at dusk it withers and dries up. The span of our life is 80 years and 10, or given strength, 80 years. But the best of those years have trouble and sorrow. They pass by speedily, and we are in darkness. Teach us, therefore, so to number our days, that we may attain a heart of wisdom. Turn to us, O God, show mercy to your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we might sing for joy all of our days. Let your deeds be seen by your servants, and your glory by their children. May your favor, O God, be upon us. Establish the work of our hands, that it may long endure. In another reading, the words of Eshet Chayil, the words from Proverbs. Eshet Chayil mi yimsa, a woman of valor who can find. She is more precious than fine pearls. Her family trusts in her, and so they lack for nothing. She does them good, never harm, all the days of her life. She perceives that her labor is rewarding, and her candle burns on into the night. She reaches out to those in need and extends her hands to the poor. She is clothed in strength and dignity, and she faces the future cheerfully. She speaks with wisdom. The law of kindness is on her lips. Her children rise up and bless her, and her family sings her praises. Many daughters have done valiantly, but you, Marilynn, you Eshet Chayil, you woman of valor, you excel them all. Amen. It almost seems that there are certain texts that guide our lives, even if we are not aware of them. And I don't know if Marilynn knew that chapter from Proverbs that I just read, but in many ways, those verses were almost like the script of her life. This text, it has come to be known as the Eshet Chayil, the woman of valor text. And the author paints, as I just shared with you, a portrait in words of the ideal woman of ancient times. But actually, this ideal woman of years past sounds a lot like the contemporary women of today. And it sounds a great deal like your mom. So many of you who remember her with admiration and awe remember her as a single mother as she raised Brian and Michael before your eyes here at Temple Sholom. Doing so in an age and in a community with few single mothers to model her tenacity and resourcefulness after. And as the poem sings, she tended to the affairs of her household, raising her children and organizing her home, a trusted counselor, provider, a professional woman in her own right. She provided not only for her own family, but mindful of the needs of the community. She worked long hours and never complained, accepting what life brought with strength and with dignity. And while this woman of valor never sought recognition, she clearly left a legacy of deeds and of values that testified to her existence and continue to do so. All that, and so much more, is true of Marilynn, this woman of valor, a woman that we have known and now we come to mourn. Family, business, Jewish community, Marilynn has left her permanent imprint in each area of life, and particularly on the lives of so many others through her work as a social worker, placing hundreds of children in adoptive homes. When our temple looked to sponsor Syrian refugees, everyone said I needed to talk to Marilynn and to Faye Reback, who helped chair our temple's effort to successfully sponsor and resettle Vietnamese refugee family decades ago. And so I called Marilynn, and she gave me some sage advice. She said, "Rabbi, you can plan for everything, but you're dealing with human lives, and they rarely go according to plan." Such was the lesson of Marilynn's own life. It wasn't in anyone's plan for her father, Benjamin, to die when she was a young teen. At 16, she got her driver's license, and her mom, Dolly, famously declared, "Good, now we can drive to Vancouver because we're moving from here to go live there with your aunt." And she did just that. Went to high school here at McGee and received honors for her mastery of Latin, a skill that her sons point out was completely of no use to her later in life. But nobody plans to use Latin. A single mom of 3 active and precocious children, Marilynn endured the most horrific thing a parent can experience when her eldest daughter, Risa, died at age 16 in a boating accident on New Year's Day. The yahrzeit is just a week from now or so. How any parent recovers from such a tragedy has always escaped me, escaped my understanding. But Marilynn did, somehow. That inner strength of hers, she had no choice. She had the 2 of you still to raise. And you were counting on her, and if there is one truth about this woman, about your mom, is that she would do whatever it takes, whatever it took, to provide for you, to care for you. She would never let you down, and she never did. You both observed, as so many have, that Marilynn, the mom, was also tough as nails. When I met her years ago in Los Angeles at the synagogue that you belong to and my in-laws belong to, and Brian and I have known each other since our days working with BBYO, she had softened. She was very much a doting grandmother who felled over her 6 grandchildren, Sam and Noah and Yoni, Brittany, Jeremy, and Rebecca, who I hope are watching online now. But as a mom to her children, she was, I think, a mama bear, protecting her cubs, watchful and protective, empowering and role modeling all at the same time. Michael says that among the many things that he learned from his mother was independence. With great love, she taught them to fend for themselves, pushed you out of the nest, so to speak, so you could fly. The boys did the grocery shopping. They made their own meals. It's not that she didn't do these things, but they did them too. She didn't coddle you, but rather gave you trust, placed in you trust, and gave you opportunity to demonstrate your maturity, just as life had taught her to do from a young age. And Brian learned about her an incredibly valuable lesson from her. He learned to love the thing that you do every day. He's going to talk more about that, I know. He learned this from running the projector for her lectures at the Children's Aid Society. And as the film reel would unravel and she would go on, he realized that it wasn't because she was just filling time, but she was imparting her soul and her message. She loved what she did with a passion, and it taught him firsthand to care about what you do, to care about others every day. The Eshet Chayil has been a source of inspiration for Jewish women throughout the ages, and so too your mother and our dear friend, our Marilynn. Her values and ideals have and will find renewed life in many members of her family and in the hearts of all of those who knew her and loved her. Indeed, they already have. May her memory always be for a blessing. Amen. So we want to invite Brian to come and share some stories of his mom.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Dan. I want to say that my mother would be embarrassed by all the wonderful things you said about her, but I actually think she would really enjoy it. And thank you for capturing her spirit the way you did. Michael and I want to thank all of you for being here. We didn't know what, who, where, how. We didn't plan this, and we wondered who would come. We wondered what it would be. Would anyone know? But we look around the room, and all of your presence is a tremendous tribute to her. And we feel the love and support that your presence here means to Michael and I. Thank you for being here. Temple Sholom was an important part of my mother's life. Rabbis Bregman, Rabbi Moskowitz, Cantor Gutman, I see you here, and I know how much you each meant to my mother and to our family growing up. I thank you, and I look around this temple, and I just know that she loved this place with all her heart, and she loved more than the building. She loved the spirit of this place, and that's because of you. Thank you. You know, before I begin talking about my mother, I just want to say that my mother's the last years of her life and the medical struggles she's had has brought me much closer to my brother. And I think my mother knew that. I really do. So, Michael, I'm grateful that you're here with me. So there are so many versions of my mother that I wanted to share with you as I started to think about this yesterday. I want to share with you the young Marilynn Hollenberg, or Madge, as her brother and sister and her mother called her. I don't know if anyone else called her Madge, but yes, probably. I want to share with you Marilynn, the college student who went off to UBC. She told me that she told her mother that she was going to UBC to be a teacher, and that was okay because, you know, in those days that was the appropriate thing for a young Jewish woman to do, to go and be a teacher. But she told me that when she got there, well, the lineup was a little too long to be a teacher at orientation day, and the social work line looked a lot shorter, and she went to see what that was about. And from that progressed a career in social work. I don't know if that's a true story. I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I like it. I want to share with you that Marilynn, and I also want to share with you the Marilynn Greene, and I want to tell you about that person who went off to Edmonton to be married and to start a family. And then there's our mom and everything she did for us and taught us by her example and what she passed on to us as her children. I'd like to share with you as much as I can about all of those versions of my mother, and I hope I can maybe just capture a bit of that. So my mother was born in Fort William, which became Thunder Bay, or is it Thunder Bay that became Fort William? Fort William. And as Rabbi Dan said, at some point at 16, they moved to Vancouver, and with her mother, Dolly. So the first version of my mother I'm thinking about today is my mother, the daughter. And a lot of my childhood revolved around watching my mother care for her mother, and watching the way that my mother took care of my grandmother's needs. Dolly was a strong woman, but she also had a rough go with her health. And my mother was that dutiful daughter who was there for her and cared for her. And I know that was an example for Michael and I of the way a child respects a parent. I know that was a message, and I hope that in some way we were able to give some of that back to her, what she gave to her mother. Most of all, when you think of my mother, you think of a woman who was furiously independent. She did things her way. And she really didn't care what people thought. We knew her as a woman who, she didn't need women's liberation or feminism to come out of her shell. She was born liberated. She was out of that, there was no shell. She had independent opinions about the way things should be. In fact, she had opinions about everything and everyone. Sometimes people didn't want to hear what she had to say. She said it anyways. She had opinions. That independence of spirit, it came from a stubbornness and a determination to get it right. Right meant her way, but to get it right. And that permeated everything she did. And she was never afraid to speak her mind about what she believed was right, whether that was in family or work or politics. She had opinions. I also think of Mom, I think of that independence, and then I think about the tremendous passion she had for her career as a social worker, a career that was not always easy. She fought to protect children at Children's Aid Society, and later on to protect children while running the Eileen Corbett Residential Reception Center. I remember, as Rabbi Dan mentioned, she gave me a job when I was 10 or 11 years old to come with her to the basement of the Children's Aid Society and operate the film projector, the old kind of movie projector. And I got to watch her in front of all of the prospective foster parents. And I got to watch a woman who actually people were listening to. As a 10-year-old, that made an impression on me. And I knew how much she cared about it, and we had to get it right. And I waited for the cue that she would give me when I had to turn the switch on to the projector. That was my job. I earned 25 cents each week for that. But more than the earning was the learning about love of work, and the learning about working for something that matters and is of importance and makes a difference. And I always knew that I had to do something like that. And I wanted very much to be my mother in front of the people, not the one in the back operating the projector. I was very proud of her. I remember being especially proud of her when she would host at our home potluck staff parties for all of the people that worked with her and worked for her. Mostly young upcoming child care workers or not quite social workers. That for me as a teenager, these 20-somethings or 30-somethings that were the coolest people in the world were coming to my house. And I remember them finding me and talking to me, these young people. So a lot of them were here from, I remember a lot of them were avoiding the draft and they were here. But I remember them coming to me and always saying, "You're so lucky, your mom is so cool." That meant something. That meant something to a teenager. I didn't really understand why but it meant something. And most of all, I'll always remember my mother's retirement party when she left the government social services, and the party was thrown for her, and the hall was full. There were hundreds and hundreds of people there speaking about her, presenting awards to her. It was a very special night for Michael and I to be at, and I have that image in my mind, and I'll never forget it. I don't know where Mom got her strength, but I know she really needed it. Her rather brief marriage ended in divorce 55 years ago, at a time when divorce was not common. She was a single mother at 30 with 3 young children moving out to Vancouver. And one of those three, as was said, my sister Risa, would die in a tragic accident as a teenager. I marvel at how strong my mother was. She kept going. Now, as tough as she was, there was no one tougher than her mother. Her mother was we were afraid of her, and she set the tone. So if you think my mother had that tough streak in her, well, she got it from her mother. But there's a moment that stands out when I think of her mother, Dolly. Yeah, some of you were thinking of my mother's cat that she named Dolly, the most miserable cat in the world. No, my grandmother Dolly was tough. But I remember my grandmother Dolly on a particular day at a particular moment. And I remember my grandmother Dolly, we were in our new home on West 33rd. Really a new home because there was no furniture there. And my grandmother Dolly and I were standing in the living room waiting for the furniture truck to come from the apartment that we moving into that house. And I was left alone with my grandmother Dolly, which didn't happen very often. I wouldn't, but I was. And this was 1967 or 68. And Dolly turned to me and said, "You need to know that your mother bought this house on her own. No man helped her." So my grandmother, even Dolly, saw in my mother that strength and knew what it was. I only understand later what it meant in the mid-60s for a woman to make it, to own a house, to buy a house, to raise her family without the help of anyone. That meant that she won Dolly's praise, and that was high praise. So I remember my mother's strength, but I also now remember a warm, caring side to her as well. She loved her two daughters-in-law, Mickey and Lisa. She adored her 6 grandchildren. They loved her equally. She was proud of them and followed their lives and always was waiting for updates on everything that was happening with them. And they loved meeting with her. They loved visiting her and spending time with her. They knew her as a doting grandmother, a loving grandmother, a side of her that Michael and I sort of weren't used to, but we saw that's what they saw in her, that side of her. That warm, caring person that was loved by her caregivers, was loved by the staff at Cavell, by her nurses, her doctors. Everybody we meet talks about a Marilynn Greene who was so sweet. So sweet. That's what they know of her, and that's what they remember. And I think that's who she was in her last years. The last few years were not easy for Mom. Her health deteriorated, and so did her sense of independence. Her strength deteriorated, and she couldn't be that independent woman who did things her way and did things which she wanted to be. As strong as she was, her physical body could not maintain itself. She fought hard to keep going, that fighting spirit in her, but in the end, there was just no fight left. And we said goodbye yesterday, and we know that she is at peace. Thank you.
Michael?
Thank you, Brian. That was incredible. And I agree that we have become closer. We have Mom to thank for that. Growing up with a working mother came with an abundance of freedom and a fair share of consequence when trust was broken. Mom taught us independence at an early age. We were the original latchkey kids. I tested my mom, and she was always up for it. Many a time, she got the last laugh, like the time she came into my bedroom on 33rd and found a marijuana joint on the floor, and she proceeded to pick it up and ask, "Whose is this?" And I replied, with a brazen lie, "I have no idea." And she snapped back, "Finders keepers." I was mortified. But as Brian alluded, Mom was cool. She was hip. She had young friends at work, and they knew how to party. She was so unselfish and completely without pretenses. And if I ever dared to get full of myself, she was quick to scold and put me back in my place. In fact, never afraid to drop a well-timed F-bomb either. We lacked for nothing as kids. And unlike my brother, I had plenty of ideas of things that I needed. Whether it was the latest sneakers, like the Nike Bruins that were only available by schlepping me to some obscure store out on Kingsway, or matching Levi's corduroys with gingham shirts from bus stop, Mom made sure I was on trend and as fashionable as any of the kids with more money. And she gave of herself, with things like early morning drives in the dark to Kerrisdale Arena so I could play hockey, carpools to Grouse Mountain with the Saxes, and even day-long treks to Mount Baker, where she'd spend the day in the lodge with a book, coffee, and a full pack of Cravenets. She didn't ski, but she wanted us to, and I've her to thank for the love of skiing she fostered in me. And boy, we had some great holidays. None more memorable than Bowen Island with the Riches. In fact, Joel, my oldest friend, he came all the way from San Francisco today to be here for us. In the latter years, as Brian alluded to, Mom was a lot easier to please. A visit every now and then, phone calls, cards for birthdays and holidays. And as her health started to wane and hospital visits became more frequent, I felt increasingly bad for having ventured off to Toronto, left her behind. But not once did she make us feel bad. She never, ever played the guilt card. As many of you know, Mom loved pets. And all those years at False Creek in her waterfront townhouse, she had various cats and dogs, and she was known as the neighborhood soft touch. I can't even count the times she'd cut me off from a long-distance phone call to say, "I have to go," because a particular dog was at her door expecting a treat. Later it became, "I have to go, I need the washroom." Mom, speaking of dogs, I'll go further that way. My mother practically saved my marriage some time ago. I made the bonehead decision of getting a puppy when the kids were far too young and I was traveling for business. When I came home from one particular road trip, Mickey gave me the ultimatum. Either this dog goes or you do. I knew what to do. Letka, one dog, my mom's Letka was getting old. My mom never really bothered with purebreds like I did. So I called her and I said, "Mom, you gotta help me out." And she said, of course, put her on the plane. And that's how Goldie the poodle came to Vancouver. And Mom spoiled her rotten. Just last summer, when we were here for an extended vacation, Mom was in VGH again. And when they thought she was ready to go back to her place at Cavell, they added a condition. Someone would have to stay with her over that weekend to make sure she was safe. I said, "You mean sleep there?" And they meant just that. And there was just one bed. I made her promise we would each stay to our sides and no cuddling. So that night, after coming home quite late from a spectacular evening on Alan Galfan's boat, I regaled her with all of the details, and we giggled ourselves to sleep. and we cuddled. It was a night I'll never forget. It was a sleepover with Mom, a first in 50 years. The next day, I think I raised a few eyebrows when I did the walk of shame out of Cavell Gardens. Speaking of the later years, as Brian again said, Mom softened a lot, and she was so grateful for the kindness of her friends and neighbors and caregivers. And Brian again alluded to, they always told us how nice she was, and she was their favorite, and she had smiles for them all, and she remembered even the most challenging names the first time she heard them. Above all, though, her personal favorite was Bonnie, and the two of them were as thick as thieves. My family and I are grateful for the above and beyond unconditional love everyone showed our mother. Mickey and I have 3 grown kids, Brittany, Jeremy, and Rebecca, that wish they could have been here today. They called her Grandma. We know she took immense pride and joy in her grandchildren's success, and we take comfort in knowing how happy and fulfilled they made her. Our mom left a wonderful legacy of family. And today's turnout is a testament to the wide reach she had, and we're grateful that so many of her friends and our friends and relatives could be here to pay their respects. And it means the world to us. Thank you.
It was March 1980. I was sitting in my study in Temple, Israel, New Rochelle, New York, and the phone rang. It was the director of placement. I was interested in this little congregation in Western Canada called Vancouver. Growing up in Toronto, Vancouver was this pothead town of hippies. And I was told that one of the members of the search committee was going to be in New York. Would I like to meet with her? Sure. So a couple of weeks later, I phoned the Barbizon Hotel to speak to a Marilynn Greene. And could we get together at her convenience? Sure. I said, I'll come down, I'll meet you. Can you tell me what you'll be wearing? What are you, the fashion police? I knew immediately I liked this person. I said, no, but I don't know what you look like, and it would help if I knew what you would be wearing, so I would be looking for you. And oh, okay. I'll be wearing a green dress. Good. I said, I'll be wearing a suit. I've got a beard. Okay, I'll find you. So I'm sort of standing by the elevator, looking for some woman in a green dress. And finally, after about 10 minutes, the elevator opens. This tall, 6'3" blonde lady walks out in a green dress. And I immediately start to follow behind her. What I didn't know, there was another shorter lady in a green dress who went out the other side. And I'm following this 6'3" blonde bombshell in a green dress going, Marilynn? Marilynn? She finally turned around and said, are you stalking me? On the other side, there's this other lady going, Rabbi Bregman? Rabbi Bregman? We eventually met. What I didn't know until yesterday at the hospital was that Brian and Michael were sitting in the lobby waiting for this interminable meeting to end, which was about an hour and a half. Went back to New Rochelle, and my wife Kathy said, so how was it? I said, well, if I have to base the congregation on this lady, this seems like it's going to be an interesting gig. And so there was a time for a formal interview where Kathy and I flew out to Vancouver. It was a sucker weekend. The sun was shining and people were skiing or sailing in the bay. You saw some snow maybe on the mountaintop. And we were met at the airport with Marilynn and another member of the search committee who ended up being our family dentist for some 30-odd years until he deserted us last year by retiring. He says the same thing about me, but so we were met by Ivan, Gassoy, and Marilynn. Now, they were going to take us from the airport to the Hyatt where they had a room reserved for us. I must tell you that it was the funniest, most hysterical ride in the car with Ivan and Marilynn. Ivan would say, and here on the left is such, and Marilynn would say, no, it's not. And Ivan would say, and over here we have such a, no, it's not. There wasn't one thing that they agreed upon for the entire time. And by the way, in those days, in 1980, you could actually get from YVR downtown in about 15 minutes or so. They took us some other places. It was truly riotous. And we got back to the room, and Kathy said, I don't care what else happens. We want to be here. These people are crazy. But they're not New York crazy. They're not Toronto crazy. They're Vancouver Temple Sholom, warm, lovingly crazy. So Kathy and I ultimately moved out here at the middle of July of 1980. Marilynn told us, it was never a suggestion, it was just, you're going to do this. Kathy and I were driving first from New York and then up to Toronto to see my family and then across Canada. And when you get into British Columbia, you're going to go to Camp Hatikva. I said, okay, why am I going to Camp Hatikva? Because Brian, my son, is the director. And so we visited Camp Hatikva, and then we came to Vancouver. And for the next couple of months, we stayed on West 33rd. Because we went out and we eventually bought a townhouse just up the street on Nanton, but it wasn't available. So we stayed in that house with your crazy cat, Gingy. Remember that crazy cat, Gingy? Yeah. Who chased our cat, who had traveled all the way from New York, out of your house for about 2 weeks until our cat finally returned. Marilynn was unique in so many ways. I never saw her as tough, though. I saw her as straight as an arrow. She said what she felt. She meant it. One of the funniest weddings I ever did was your wedding. Right here. New Year's Eve, right? We came back from Florida early. I will not repeat what went on under the chuppah between your mom and your dad standing here, but it will be in the book. No names will be changed. The dialogue will be direct, and my lawyers are already in place. It was a hysterical wedding. You had a band leader here, and I knew that right from the beginning this really wasn't going to be a good evening in that regard because he parked in my parking spot. You had an uncle who was a chazan and came in from New York, right? I can't remember what I did this morning, but I can remember these things just a few years. Yeah. And after every blessing of the Sheva Brachot, this Russian orchestra leader decided to go la da da da, and at one point your uncle turned to me laughing and saying, "Do you work with this guy often?" Your father turned to your mom and said, "Okay, I will tell you. Where'd you get this guy?" And your mother said, "If you paid any money for the wedding, we maybe would have gotten somebody better." I turned to them and said, "You know, my mic is off, but I don't think that I should be the only one who should share in this wonderful conversation that's going on right now. Would you like to share it with everybody?" That kept them quiet, at least momentarily. Kathy had a very, very special and close relationship with your mom, because Kathy is the real caregiver in our family as well. And Kathy knows a caregiver when she sees one. And there was just a phenomenal connection between Kathy and your mom. And we lived through the move from 33rd down to Falls Creek, and then the move to Cavell. And these last years were tough, but she was always in our hearts and our minds, and vice versa. She loved this place. She loved Temple Sholom. And she joined probably because she was a renegade. And Temple Sholom in those early years, we were the renegade congregation. You had Beth Israel, you had Sheret Tzedek, and you had this verstunkene little congregation at the Unitarian or on West 10th, but it was who she was, because she was egalitarian before the word was ever created. She was inclusive before that became part of an everyday dictionary word. She was people. Our oldest son's bris was at your home at West 33rd. And Kathy reminded me just this morning that on January 25th, 1985, when the synagogue was firebombed, who did she call immediately at 2 o'clock in the morning to come over and babysit Shai so she could join me? It was Marilynn, who popped over just a few minutes later. Rabbis and Rebbitzins remember these things, of how loving and caring, how strong, and you've said it, but she truly was. She was a rock. And I am eternally grateful for having that conversation with that lady in the green dress in the Barbizan Hotel over 36 and a half years ago. God bless you, Marilynn, and thank you.
Friends, I'll ask you please to rise for the chanting of El Malei Rachamim.
El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Brameromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, B'mahalot Kedoshim Utahorim, Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim, את נשמת מרים בת בנימין ודליה, שהלכה לעולמו. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתה, ענב על הרחמים, הסתירך בסתר כנפיך לעולמים. וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה ונאמר Amen.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Marilynn, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence, in the shadow of your wings. Let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace. Amen. And friends, we remain standing and turn to the inside of your program as we recite the Kaddish together. Yit Gadal, V'yit Kadash, Shemei Rabbah, V'yalma Divrach, Ilrutei, V'yamlich Malchutei, B'chayechon of Yomechon, Uv'chayei L'chol Beit Yisrael, B'agalav V'zman Kariv Yimaru. Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah, Mevarach Le'olam Olamei Almaya, Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitroman V'yitnaseh, V'yit Adar V'yit Aleh V'yit Alal Shemei D'Kudesha B'richu Le'ela Min Kol Birchata V'shirata Tushbechata V'nechemata Damin Ron B'alma V'yimaru. Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chaim Aleinu V'yal Kol Yisrael V'yimaru. Amen. Osei Shalom B'mromav Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu V'yal Kol Yisrael V'yal Kol Yoshvei Tevel V'yimaru. Amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn. Comfort this family and all of us who are bereaved. And we say together, Amen. Friends, this concludes our service. I'll invite you, please, to join us in the social hall so that we can celebrate as Marilynn would want us to do, with a nice lunch. May her memory always be for a blessing. Amen. Thank you.